The United States of America, in 2025, should be invulnerable. It should be completely immune to any oil shock the world could throw at it. Why? Because America is, without question, the undisputed energy superpower of the world. Right now, more than 13 million barrels of crude oil are being pumped from American soil every single day. That is more than Saudi Arabia. It is more than Russia. We are, quite literally, swimming in oil. In theory, the United States has finally achieved the 50-year dream, the dream of energy independence. We produce enough to cover our own needs. But here is the staggering, inconvenient truth, the one that nobody talks about. America doesn't just still import oil. The United States is the second largest importer now of oil on planet Earth. Every day, 8 million barrels of foreign oil arrive at American ports. Why? Why would a nation that is overflowing with oil simultaneously be desperate for it? Why are we selling what we have, only to buy back the very thing we supposedly don't need? Let's look at the numbers, because they tell the real story. According to the latest 2025 data from the Energy Information Administration, the U.S. is producing at a record-breaking pace, roughly 13.2 million barrels per day, mostly gushing out of the Permian Basin in Texas. A true engineering miracle. But American consumption, our demand, is still colossal. We use about 20 million barrels every day. Now, here is where it gets strange. We sell about 4.1 million barrels per day of our own high-quality crude oil to other countries. And at the same time, we import about 8.5 million barrels per day of total petroleum products. And the most critical part of that is that roughly 6.5 million of those barrels are crude oil. Raw, unrefined oil. Now, you've probably heard politicians on both sides brag that America is a net exporter. And that is technically true some of the time. But that statistic is deeply misleading. It's a magic trick. It includes refined products, like gasoline and diesel, that we sell after we've processed them. When you look only at the raw stuff, the crude oil itself, the picture flips completely upside down. The United States is, simultaneously, the world's #1 producer and the world's #2 importer, second only to China. This is not an accounting error. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate, calculated economic strategy. So, what does this mean for you? When a politician says energy independence, you imagine $2 a gallon gas. You imagine we are safe from the chaos of the global market. But in reality, the price you pay at the pump today is still chained to that global market. This paradox, this seemingly impossible fact, is the master key. It is the key to understanding everything about our modern economy. It explains the price you pay for gas. It explains the staggering, mind-blowing wealth of Texas. It explains American foreign policy. It explains our complicated relationship with Saudi Arabia. It explains our quiet, desperate reliance on Canada. It even explains our confusing stance on Venezuela. This paradox shows us that energy independence is a far more complex and far more elusive concept than we were ever led to believe. America did it. We managed to free ourselves from the grip of OPEC. But in doing so, we have chained ourselves to an entirely different and far more complex global machine. To decode this core paradox, to truly understand this massive economic contradiction, we need to answer 3 fundamental questions. First, how did America, a nation that was in energy decline, a nation that was dangerously dependent on OPEC for decades, manage to pull off the most spectacular comeback in energy history, becoming the undisputed #1 oil superpower? In less than a decade, this is the story of the shale miracle. Second, and this is the key to the entire puzzle, why, despite this new dominance, does the United States still need to import millions of barrels of foreign oil every single day? What is the profound technical secret hidden inside America's trillion-dollar refining machine that forces it to buy oil from other countries, even when it's swimming in its own? This is the story of the great incompatibility. Baka. And finally, how long can this shale miracle truly last? This new type of oil extraction is incredibly fast, but the wells also dry up incredibly quickly. With the best reserves now being tapped and immense environmental pressure building, is America standing on its final peak? Are we about to witness the end of this boom and the beginning of an entirely new energy crisis? This is the story of sustainability. Answering these three questions is the only way to understand the truth. It all started with complacency. You could even call it arrogance, because we have to remember, America was the birthplace of the entire global oil industry. It wasn't in the sands of Saudi Arabia. It was in Pennsylvania. The first commercial oil well, the Drake well, it was ours. For the entire first half of the 20th century, the United States was the Saudi Arabia of the world. We weren't just a player, we were the game. We powered our own industrial revolution, we powered the Allied victory in World War II, and we supplied the entire world as it rebuilt. We were the undisputed kings of energy, and it felt invincible. It felt like it would last forever. But then, in 1956, at a meeting of the American Petroleum Institute, a geologist named M. King Hubbert, a man working inside the industry for shale oil, stood up and presented a shocking and deeply unpopular prediction. He called it peak oil theory. It was a simple but terrifying idea. He said that for any given oil field or any given country, production doesn't just go on forever. It follows a predictable bell curve. It rises. It hits a maximum point, the peak, and then, no matter what you do, no matter how much you drill, it begins a permanent, irreversible decline. And then he dropped the bombshell. He had done the math for the entire United States. He predicted that American oil production would hit its all-time peak sometime between 1965 and 1970. And after that, America's age of energy dominance would be over. Forever. The industry was furious. They called him a heretic. They tried to get him fired. Politicians completely ignored him. America was at the absolute height of its post-war power. The economy was booming. The idea that our power was about to run out, it wasn't just wrong. It was un-American. But King Hubbert was right. Almost to the exact year, American oil production hit its all-time maximum in 1970. And just as his bell curve had predicted, it began to fall. And it didn't just dip, it fell, year after year after year. This was the beginning of a 38-year-long, agonizing decline. From 1970 all the way to 2008, America's domestic power was draining away. We were running out of our own cheap, easy-to-get oil. And so, America, the superpower that had built its entire 20th century economy on cheap, abundant energy, was forced to transform. We went from being the world's biggest producer to being the world's biggest and most desperate customer. We became an oil addict, and our addiction, our desperate need for foreign oil, would come to define the next 4 decades of American history. As our own wells ran dry, the hunt began. America had to look abroad to feed its growing addiction, and it found what it needed. It found an ocean of oil. In the Middle East, in Venezuela, in Mexico, even in Canada. And this foreign oil wasn't just abundant. It was cheap. It was so cheap, it seemed to make no economic sense to spend billions trying to find the last expensive drops of oil at home. And this is the single most important decision, the absolute pivot point that led to the paradox we have today. Over these next 30 years, from the 1970s through the 1980s and 90s, the American oil industry made a choice. It wasn't a choice made by the government. It was a choice made by the market, by corporations like Exxon, Chevron, and Shell. They decided to invest hundreds of billions of dollars building the largest, most complex, and most expensive industrial machines on Earth. They built the Great American Refinery System along the Gulf Coast, in Texas and Louisiana. Massive cities of steel, pipes, and towers rose from the swamps. They were, and still are, engineering marvels. But here is the billion-dollar secret. They did not build these magnificent refineries to process American oil. The light, easy oil from Texas, the oil that M. King Hubbard had proven was running out, was not what these machines were designed for. No, they were built to process the imported stuff. They were specifically engineered to handle the only kind of oil the rest of the world was selling in bulk, the cheap, low-quality crude. This oil has a name. It's called heavy sour oil, and it's nothing like the clean, light oil America used to produce. Heavy means it's thick, dense, almost like asphalt. And sour is an industry term that means it is full of sulfur. It's dirty, it's corrosive, it's incredibly difficult to work with. You can't just put this stuff in a car. It has to be chemically and violently ripped apart, cleaned, and rebuilt at a molecular level. And that is what these new billion-dollar American refineries were designed to do. They were complex coking refineries, masterpieces of chemical engineering, built for one purpose: to turn the world's cheapest, dirtiest, heaviest sludge into America's priceless, clean-burning gasoline. This was the great bet. America, in its quest for cheap energy, had just wagered its entire national energy infrastructure on a permanent, stable, and uninterrupted supply of foreign oil. It was a bet that would soon go catastrophically wrong. This bet was a strategic catastrophe, and America paid the price, dearly. The first shock came in 1973, the Yom Kippur War. In retaliation for American support of Israel, the Arab nations within OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, did the unthinkable. They weaponized their oil. They turned off the tap. They declared a full, crippling oil embargo against the United States. The effect was not just immediate, it was paralyzing. The price of oil quadrupled, jumping 400% overnight. But the real impact wasn't on a spreadsheet, it was on the streets. Panic swept the nation. Gas stations, one by one, ran dry. For the first time in its history, America saw lines, miles-long lines of cars, sometimes waiting for 8, 10, 12 hours, just hoping for a few gallons of gasoline. Fistfights broke out at the pumps. Truckers went on strike. Businesses shut down. The entire American economy, the engine of the free world, was grinding to a halt. The government became so desperate, it imposed a national 55-mile-per-hour speed limit, not for safety, but just to conserve a few drops of fuel. In that moment, America, the superpower, realized it was being held hostage. It was being suffocated by nations half a world away. And just when the trauma of the 70s began to fade, it happened again. The Iranian Revolution, the Shah, a key American ally, was overthrown. Chaos engulfed the region, and another critical supply of heavy sour oil vanished from the global market. Prices didn't just rise, they skyrocketed, doubling, then tripling. America was plunged right back into a second, devastating energy crisis. This became the defining national trauma. For the next 30 years, this was the singular obsession, the recurring nightmare of every single American president, from Nixon to Carter to Reagan, all the way to Bush Jr. Our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. It was recognized, correctly, as the single greatest threat to U.S. national security. It was the ultimate Achilles heel. And so, the hunt was on. The dream of energy independence. It wasn't just an economic slogan. It wasn't about getting cheap gas. It became a matter of national survival. It was the desperate strategic imperative of a superpower that had just been brought to its knees. And then, the miracle happened. But it didn't come from the places you would expect. It didn't come from the glass towers of Houston. It wasn't Exxon. It wasn't Chevron. It wasn't Big Oil. They had all but given up on America. They had accepted M. King Hubbard's prophecy as unbreakable fate. The easy oil was gone, and that was that. No, this miracle, this energy revolution it came from one man, a stubborn, relentless, independent wildcatter, a man who simply refused to believe it was over. His name was George Mitchell. For decades, geologists had a painful secret. They all knew that deep beneath the earth, in formations like the Barnett Shale in Texas, there were billions, perhaps trillions, of barrels of oil and natural gas. But it was trapped. It was locked away. This wasn't the easy oil of the 1950s. It wasn't in big underground pools like in Saudi Arabia, where you could just stick a giant straw in the ground and suck it up. No. This oil, this gas, it was imprisoned. It was held in microscopic pores inside dense, impermeable rock formations called shale. It was like a solid sponge, made of stone. You couldn't pump it. It wouldn't flow. Everyone knew it was there, but no one could figure out how to get it out profitably. It was a treasure chest with no key. George Mitchell became obsessed. He spent decades and tens of millions of dollars drilling wells that failed, one after another. His own engineers told him to stop. His investors told him he was crazy, but he refused to quit. He was convinced there was a way. And finally, after years of relentless trial and error, his team didn't just invent one new technology, they perfected the combination of two existing ones. The first was hydraulic fracking. This was the brute force. The idea was to pump a highly pressurized mixture of water, sand, and chemicals, thousands of feet down into the well. At pressures so high, they would shatter the solid rock. This controlled explosion, this frac, would create a web of tiny new fractures, new pathways, for the trapped oil and gas to finally escape. But by itself, that wasn't enough. A single vertical well, even a fracked one, only touched a tiny, insignificant sliver of the rock. The real breakthrough, the game changer, was pairing it with horizontal drilling. Think about it. The shale formation isn't a deep pool, it's a thin layer, like a pancake, maybe only 100 feet thick, but stretching for miles in every direction underground. A traditional vertical well would just punch straight through that pancake. A complete waste. The new technique was an engineering marvel. You drill straight down for 2 miles, and then you turn the drill bit 90 degrees and drill sideways, horizontally, for another 1, 2, even 3 miles, running perfectly inside that thin pancake layer of rock. This was the golden key. The combination was revolutionary. First, you drill horizontally along the treasure, and then you use hydraulic fracking, sending multiple targeted blasts down that horizontal pipe, shattering the rock open from the inside, all along its 3-mile length. Suddenly, a single well wasn't just touching 100 feet of rock, it was touching thousands, even tens of thousands of feet of rock all at once. This combination, fracking and horizontal drilling, changed our planet. It was the code that unlocked the vault. It made the impossible possible. It turned rock that was once considered worthless into the most valuable energy source on the planet. It unlocked a supply of American oil that was previously, and quite literally, untouchable. Starting around 2008, the shale gale was unleashed. It wasn't a gradual change, it was an explosion. Remember that chart, the one showing M. King Hubbard's peak oil theory? The one that showed American oil production in a 38-year agonizing terminal decline. Well, around 2008, something impossible happened to that chart. The line, which had only gone down for 4 decades, suddenly, violently, turned. It didn't just level off. It didn't just inch upwards. It went vertical. It became a straight line, pointing to the sky. It was the most dramatic reversal in the history of industrial energy. The prophecy was broken. The decline was over. The boom was back. This new technology, this combination of fracking and horizontal drilling, tore across the American heartland like a wildfire. Places that were once considered dead, old oil fields that had been tapped out for generations, suddenly became the most productive oil fields on Earth. The Permian Basin in West Texas, a place of tumbleweeds and ghost towns, became the epicenter of the new global energy market. It became more productive than most entire countries in OPEC. And far to the north, under the frozen plains of North Dakota, the Bakken Shale Formation erupted. Small, rural towns, places you have never heard of, like Williston and Watford City, became the epicenters of a modern-day gold rush. People flocked in from all over the country, chasing six-figure salaries. The populations boomed. The landscapes were transformed overnight. The numbers are simply staggering. From 2008 to 2018, in a single decade, American oil production doubled. It went from 5 million barrels a day to over 10 million. Soon after, it surpassed Saudi Arabia. Then it surpassed Russia. The United States of America, a nation that had been brought to its knees by its addiction to foreign oil, had, in the blink of an eye, become the largest and most powerful oil producer on the planet. America, by itself, had redrawn the entire global energy map, but in doing so, it had created a brand new and deeply confusing problem. A problem that, in many ways, was even more complex than the one it had just solved. But this raises a critical question. Why did this revolution happen in the United States? America is not the only country with shale rock. Far from it. Canada has massive reserves. Argentina has the Vaca Muerta, one of the largest deposits on Earth. China is sitting on enormous shale formations. So why did it happen in Texas and not in Beijing or Buenos Aires? The answer is that the United States had a perfect, unique ecosystem that no other country on Earth could match. First, and most importantly, private mineral rights. This is the secret ingredient. In almost every other country, if you own a piece of land, you only own the surface. The government, the state, owns everything underneath it. But in America, if you own a ranch in Texas, you own that land, all the way down to the center of the earth. This created a powerful, personal, financial incentive. When oil companies came knocking and landowners didn't fight them, they welcomed them because it meant royalties. It meant they could become millionaires just by leasing their backyard. Second, capital markets. Fracking is not a business for the faint of heart. It is incredibly expensive and incredibly risky. You need a financial system, like Wall Street, with a deep appetite for risk. You need venture capitalists and private equity funds willing to burn money, to gamble hundreds of millions of dollars on independent startups, all chasing the next big gusher. Add to that a massive, pre-existing infrastructure, a spider's web of pipelines already crisscrossing the nation, ready to move all this new oil and gas to market. And finally, a highly skilled, technologically advanced workforce. America had generations of drilling expertise ready to adapt and perfect these new technologies at lightning speed. It was the perfect storm, a victory, not of big government planning, but of raw, aggressive, wildcatter capitalism. But this incredible revolution, this shale miracle, created a brand new, massive $1,000 billion problem. A problem that is the absolute heart of the paradox. The type of oil that this new fracking technology unlocked was not the type of oil that America's refineries were built to handle. This is the most important thing to understand. Not all crude oil is the same. Not by a long shot. It's not one single commodity. It's a vast spectrum, and it's generally defined by two key properties. First, there is light sweet crude oil. This is the stuff from the shale, the oil from the Permian and the Bakken. Light means it has a low density. It's thin. It flows easily. Sweet is an old-timey industry term that means it's low in sulfur. This is the good stuff. This is the premium. It is high quality, easy to work with, and you can refine it into high-value products like gasoline with relatively simple technology. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, there is heavy sour crude oil. This is the stuff America had been importing for 30 years. This is the stuff from Canada, from Venezuela, from Saudi Arabia. Heavy means it's incredibly dense. It's thick, it's sludgy, sometimes as thick as molasses or asphalt. And sour means it is full of corrosive, toxic sulfur. This is the low-quality stuff, the bottom of the barrel. It is nasty, it is dirty, and it requires an insane amount of complex, expensive, high-tech engineering to crack it, to break it down, to clean it, and to turn it into the same end products like gasoline and diesel. And that was the new giant American problem. Thanks to the shale revolution, America was suddenly, unexpectedly, the world's #1 producer of the premium, light sweet stuff. But as we just learned, America had spent the last 30 years and hundreds of billions of dollars building the world's most complex refining system, designed for only one purpose: to process the cheap, dirty, heavy sour stuff. And this is the trillion-dollar paradox, because those American refineries, especially the massive complexes on the Gulf Coast, they are the most complex, most sophisticated, and most expensive refineries on planet Earth. They are our crown jewels, but they were built over 30 long years with hundreds of billions of dollars for one job and one job only: to process cheap, heavy sour oil. These aren't just simple refineries. They are known in the industry as deep conversion or coking refineries. They are colossal, multi-billion-dollar machines, cities of steel, whose entire purpose is to take that thick, heavy, sour sludge and chemically smash it. They use intense heat and extreme pressure to crack the heavy hydrocarbon molecules, breaking them apart, purifying them, and reassembling them into the gasoline and diesel that our economy runs on. And here is the problem. You cannot just pour high-quality, light-sweet oil, our new American shale oil, into a refinery that was custom-built for heavy sour sludge. It doesn't work. It's like having a Bugatti Veyron, a billion-dollar Formula One race car, the most complex engine on Earth, and then trying to fuel it with jet fuel, or just simple, low-octane gasoline. You'd think, premium car, premium fuel, what's the problem? But the engine, the complex, fine-tuned machine, it wasn't built for that. Technically, it might run, but it will run terribly. It will choke. It will sputter. The fuel injectors won't work right. The exhaust will be all wrong. You are using a machine of incredible complexity to do a job that a much simpler, cheaper machine could do far better. It is profoundly inefficient when these complex coking refineries are forced to run. Light, sweet oil. They can't operate at full capacity. They are underutilized. Even worse, they produce the wrong mix of products. They were designed to churn out a specific ratio of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel from heavy crude, but when you put light crude in, the formula breaks. You get too much of the low-value stuff, like propane or butane, and not enough of the high-value diesel fuel that the market and our trucking industry desperately needs. It's a technical and economic nightmare. So, the American oil industry, the giants like Exxon, Chevron, and Valero, found themselves facing a colossal, industry-defining choice. They had two options. Option one, rebuild. They could spend hundreds of billions of dollars and an entire decade building a whole new generation of simple refineries called topping refineries, designed specifically to handle all this new, light, sweet American oil. But this was a terrifying bet. What if the shale boom was just a bubble? What if it only lasted 15 or 20 years? What if environmental regulation or the rise of electric cars made those new refineries obsolete, just as they were finally finished being built? It was an enormous, unacceptable financial risk. Or option 2, do nothing. They could just keep the old complex refineries just as they were, the ones built for heavy sour oil. But if they did that, where would they get the oil? Their entire business model, it was based on cheap, heavy crude from places like Venezuela and Mexico and Saudi Arabia. And all of this new American oil, the stuff gushing out of Texas, would be effectively useless to them. They were stuck. America was producing the wrong kind of oil. But they didn't choose option 1. And they didn't choose option 2. They chose a third option, an absolutely brilliant, counterintuitive economic solution. Instead of fighting the problem, they leaned into it. They embraced the mismatch. They decided to profit from it. The strategy is called arbitrage, and it works in 2 simple, beautiful hop steps. Step 1, sell high. The American oil industry, the producers, the wildcatters in Texas and North Dakota, they decided to take their premium, high-quality into light sweet shale oil and not sell it to American refineries. Instead, they would export it. In 2015, the U.S. government lifted the 40-year-old ban on crude oil exports, and a fire hose of American oil was unleashed onto the global market. They sold it for a premium price to places like Europe and Asia. Why? Because those countries have simpler refineries, the exact kind of refineries that are perfectly suited to handle this light, sweet crude. For countries in Europe desperate to get off Russian oil, this new American supply was a godsend. So, America sells its high-quality, high-price oil to the rest of the world. Step 2, buy low. At the same time, the other side of the industry, the American refiners, the owners of those massive, complex, heavy sour machines on the Gulf Coast, they just continued doing exactly what they were built to do. They continued to import millions of barrels of cheap, low-quality, heavy sour oil. But now, their biggest supplier wasn't the unstable Middle East. As of 2025, their number 1 source, by a mile, is Canada. The Canadian oil sands produce some of the heaviest, sourest, and cheapest crude on the planet. And for the hyper-complex refineries in Texas and Louisiana, it is the perfect, low-cost feedstock. It's stable, it's predictable, and it's delivered by a pipeline from a friendly neighbor. And this is the result. It is the perfect system. The American producers are happy. They get to sell their premium oil on the global market for the highest possible price. The American refiners are happy. They get to buy the cheapest, dirtiest crude and use their magical multi-billion-dollar machines to turn that sludge into high-value gasoline at a massive profit. Their refineries are running at full capacity 24/7. Their profits have never been higher. America isn't just an oil producer anymore. It has become a giant value-add refining machine. The entire strategy is to maximize something called the crack spread. That is the simple, beautiful difference between the low price of the heavy sour crude they buy and the high price of the gasoline and diesel they sell. And this is the answer. This is the solution to the great paradox. Why does America, the world's largest oil producer, still import 8 million barrels of oil every day? Because it is the single most profitable way to run the entire machine. It's not a sign of failure. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate, brilliant economic strategy that has turned America's greatest weakness, its old, outdated refining infrastructure, into its single greatest money-printing strength. But this entire brilliant, profitable, globe-spanning machine has a fatal flaw. It has an expiration date. The shale miracle that powers this whole system has a dark and very expensive secret. It burns out incredibly fast. Think about a traditional oil well, the kind they have in Saudi Arabia. It's a gushing fountain. You drill it once, and it can produce oil consistently for 30, 40, even 50 years. A shale well, a fracked well, is not a fountain. It's a rocket. It's a violent, explosive, short-term burst of energy. A typical fracked well can lose 70% of its production in just the first 2 or 3 years. It comes on strong, and then it dies fast. This creates a terrifying, relentless problem for the entire American oil industry. It's known as the Red Queen effect. It comes from Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen tells Alice, "Here you see it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." This is the reality of the shale industry, because all of their existing wells are constantly and rapidly dying. The industry is forced to drill thousands and thousands of brand new wells every single year, not to grow, but just to keep production flat. They are forced to run faster and faster just to stay in the same place. And now, in 2025, that race is getting harder. The sweet spots, the best, cheapest, and most productive parts of the Permian Basin, they've mostly been drilled. The easy wins are gone. Now companies are being forced to drill in more expensive, less productive Tier 2 and Tier 3 acreage. The costs are rising. The returns are falling. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, their official forecast is that American oil production, this massive boom, will hit its final peak sometime around 2030. And after that, just like M. King Hubbert predicted for the first boom, it will enter a permanent decline. Now, you might have heard a scary number, like the 11 years of reserves mentioned in the original report. That specific number S is a bit misleading. It refers to proved reserves, which is a very strict accounting term. But the principle, the spirit of that number is absolutely correct. The party is coming to an end. The explosive, decade-long boom years are over. The clock on this entire miraculous machine is ticking, and it is ticking very, very fast. But this machine, this brilliant, profitable, globe-spanning machine, has a fatal flaw. It has an expiration date. The shale miracle that powers this whole system has a dark and very expensive secret. It burns out incredibly fast. Think about a traditional oil well, the kind they have in Saudi Arabia. It's a gushing fountain. You drill it once and it can produce oil consistently for 30, 40, even 50 years. A shale well, a fracked well, is not a fountain. It's a rocket. It's a violent, explosive, short-term burst of energy. A typical fracked well can lose 70% of its production in just the first 2 or 3 years. It comes on strong, and then it dies fast. This creates a terrifying, relentless problem for the entire American oil industry. It's known as the Red Queen effect. It comes from Alice in Wonderland, where the Red Queen tells Alice, "Here you see it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." This is the reality of the shale industry, because all of their existing wells are constantly and rapidly dying. The industry is forced to drill thousands and thousands of brand new wells every single year, not to grow, but just to keep production flat. They are forced to run faster and faster just to stay in the same place. And now, in 2025, that race is getting harder. The sweet spots, the best, cheapest, and most productive parts of the Permian Basin, they've mostly been drilled. The easy wins are gone. Now, companies are being forced to drill in more expensive, less productive Tier 2 and Tier 3 acreage. The costs are rising. The returns are falling. The U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, their official forecast is that American oil production, this massive boom, will hit its final peak sometime around 2030. And after that, just like M. King Hubbert predicted for the first boom, it will enter a permanent decline. Now, you might have heard a scary number, like the 11 years of reserves mentioned in the original report. That specific number is a bit misleading. It refers to proved reserves, which is a very strict accounting term. But the principle, the spirit of that number is absolutely correct. The party is coming to an end. The explosive, decade-long boom years are over. The clock on this entire miraculous machine is ticking, and it is ticking very, very fast. And finally, there is the third cost, the strategic cost, because this entire brilliant economic arbitrage machine has just traded one dependency for another. The 30-year nightmare, the strategic obsession, was to free America from Middle Eastern oil, to break the back of OPEC, to end the trauma of the 1973 embargo. And on that front, we succeeded. America is no longer held hostage by the politics of Saudi Arabia. But in solving that problem, we have created a new, quiet dependency. Because remember, those massive, complex, multi-billion-dollar refineries on the Gulf Coast, they still absolutely 100% require a massive, uninterrupted daily diet of heavy sour oil. And we don't produce that. We have to import it. So, where are we getting it from, as we said, in 2025? Our number one supplier, by a staggering margin, is Canada. Now, let's be clear. This is, by every measure, a better dependency. Canada is a stable, reliable, friendly neighbor. They are not a geopolitical rival. They are not a volatile dictatorship half a world away. This is, without question, a massive strategic upgrade. But it is still a dependency. The entire American refining industry, the machine that provides the diesel for our trucks, the jet fuel for our planes, the gasoline for our cars, is now critically dependent on a steady flow of Canadian heavy oil coming down through a handful of massive pipelines, like the Keystone XL. If anything were to happen to that supply, whether it's a political dispute, a new environmental law in Canada, or a physical disruption to those few critical pipelines, the American refining hub on the Gulf Coast would face a catastrophic crisis almost overnight. We have successfully, brilliantly, swapped one unstable, terrifying dependency for a much more stable, much friendlier, and much safer one. But it is, still, a dependency, the grand 50-year-old dream of true, unadulterated energy independence, where America needs nothing from anyone. That dream has still not been achieved. And so, there we have the answer. The Great American Paradox is not a failure. It is not an accident. It is a sophisticated, brilliant economic arbitrage strategy. America became the world's #1 producer thanks to the shale revolution, which creates a flood of high-quality, light, sweet oil. But they remain the world's second-largest importer because their entire $1 trillion refining system was built for an older world. It was engineered for cheap, heavy sour oil. The genius solution. Sell their premium high-priced oil to the rest of the world and import the cheap low-grade oil from abroad to keep their massive complex money-printing machines running 24/7. So what is the final lesson in this massive, complex American story? What is the one moral to take away from this paradox? It's that the term energy independence is a dangerously simple phrase for a deeply complex reality. America's story proves that true independence isn't just about how much oil you can drill. It's not a simple number. It's not about being number one in production. It's not about the volume. It's about the type. It's about compatibility. It's about infrastructure. It's about the machine that you have already built. The United States achieved the first part of the dream. We learned to drill more than any nation on Earth. We produced a flood of our own energy, a sea of light sweet crude. But we discovered that our entire trillion-dollar national infrastructure, our refineries, our industrial heartland was built for a completely different world. It was built for heavy sour sludge. And so the American story shows us that energy independence is not just about having the oil. It's about being able to use what you have. And if your infrastructure, your giant, complex, expensive machine, doesn't match your new resources, you haven't achieved independence. You've just created a new and far more complicated paradox.